Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. Thank you very much for joining us for our first IEP strategic debate for 2024. Before we get started, I'm just going to go through a few housekeeping remarks, and then I'll hand over to Martin Benavides, who is our director. So first of all, please note that this session will be recorded, and the recordings will be available after the webinar on our website. Interpretation is available in 3 languages, in English, French, and Spanish. We will have our speakers who will speak alternatively in English, French, and Spanish, so it's very useful if you don't speak all 3 languages that you know where the interpretation is. So if you look down at the bottom of your screen, there should be a circle that says interpretation, and you can find your language there. You can also consult the PowerPoints of this session in your language. My colleagues will paste the link to access the PowerPoints in the chat in a minute. If you have anything you would like to communicate to us, any technical issues, please do so through the chat. And we'd also love it if you could say hi, tell us who you are and where you're connecting from. The panelists will also answer some of your questions towards the end of the session. So if you have any questions about what you're hearing today, please also post them in the chat and we'll do a selection towards the end. And the last point is at the end of the session, there will be a post-event survey that will open up automatically. We will be very grateful if you could take just a couple of minutes to complete the survey because your feedback is very useful for us. And on that note, I will hand over to Martin.
Thank you, Camila. Good afternoon, bonjour, buenos días. I'm happy to open the IAP News series of strategic debates that will be focusing on this year on the use of data and evidence to inform policy and planning from design to implementation. The rationale behind this series is as follows. The amount of data and evidence available to decision makers, educational planners, and managers has grown exponentially over the past decade. Yet, in many countries, the use of evidence in formulating educational policies and plans remains limited. To review the kind of evidence we are producing, but also to increase the dissemination of available evidence is then critical. This series of strategic debates is organized in collaboration with the Global Education Cooperation Mechanism for SDG 4 and the activities of the SDG 4 Education 2030 High-Level Steering Committee. More specifically, with the Evidence and Policy Technical Committee, which IEP is technical colleague with UNESCO, EDP, and the OECD. For this first debate, we have decided to focus on the important topic of the use of education in emergency data and evidence to inform crisis-sensitive planning. This echoes a context where governments, humanitarians, and development partners increasingly recognize the need to adopt evidence-informed risk reduction strategies. This requires timely and reliable data and evidence to quantify and analyze the extent to which crises, including those due to climate change, affect educational systems. But at the same time, they are faced with reality characterized by critical lack of timely and quality data both on risk and during crisis, or data that are inconsistent, which in turn hamper planning and efficient implementation of education service delivery. Critical questions to be addressed in this context, among others, are how to address problems related with the lack of reliable national data, available data, and also data fragmentation, how to respond to difference in the use of indicators, limited data sharing, and lack of coherence across government, humanitarian, and development actors in this domain. Beyond that, how to promote EiE data in sector-wide information management and make sure that they actually get used to set priorities and formulate evidence-based policies. To discuss those very important issues, we are fortunate to hear from 4 specialists working in education in emergencies in very different contexts and who will dive in their presentation into concrete country experiences. In first place, we have Diogo Amaro, who is a program specialist in the IIP's technical operation team. He contributes to IIP works on crisis identification planning and support governments with the development of crisis risk management strategy for the education sector. Then we will have Frost David, who is a senior education program specialist at the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugee, UNRWA, HQ in Amman, leading on UNRWA educations in emergency program. Let me now turn to Spanish to introduce our colleague from Latin America. So you can change the channel. Galo Mauricio López Lindao is Director
Galo
Nacional.
Mauricio López Lindao is National Director of Education Analysis and Information at the Ministry of Education of Ecuador. Previously, he worked as National Director of Analysis at the National Institute of Evaluation and also at the United Nations Refugee Agency, NUR. And finally, he worked as a
Speaker. I'm gonna now introduce him in French, so you can change your channel. Benjamin Cohn dirige le département.
Benjamin Cohn is leading the Studies and Perspectives department in the Technical Secretariat of Education in emergency situations in Burkina Faso within
Au sein du ministère de
the
l'Éducation.
Ministry of National Education, Literacy, and the Promotion of National Languages. He's responsible for collecting data, mainly in the different regions of the country where there is a major security problems, particularly in the Monhoun, Cascade, Eastern Center, Northern Center, the North, the Sahel, and the Southwest regions.
Pour organiser la session,
So the way we're going to organize this session is the following.
every panelist will have 5 minutes for doing his presentation. I'm gonna be taking the time for that. And after that, we will have 2 different round tables of 15 minutes each, where there are gonna be answering general questions that will be raised. After that, we will try to answer the question that you will be sending by the chat. We hope to have at least 30 minutes for that section of the seminar. So thank you very much again. And this is very important seminar, and we're very happy to begin this series of a strategic debate with this very critical topic right now. So right now, over to you, Diogo.
Hi, everybody. Diogo Amaro from the IIP. I'll be presenting a few of the tools that we've developed as part of our work on crisis-sensitive planning. So this will be a quick overview that will give grounding to the work that was then implemented at the country level by those other 3 experts that are going to come in. So starting off with the rationale for those tools. So why do we need education emergencies data? So here we have a few reasons why education emergencies data is crucial. The first one being that we need data to make good policies that will be broken down into good programs, right? So we need data to inform our decisions, to make sure that we target the most vulnerable, the children that are most in need, the students that are most vulnerable. So this is first aspect. Second aspect, we need data to make sure that our policies are impactful. So not only impactful in the way that we design them, but impactful once they are in place. So we also use EiE data for monitoring and evaluation. The third aspect in which EiE data is very important is advocacy. And we do need data for each one of those 5 stages. So we need data for the risk analysis, to the diagnosis, for formulating policies, for dividing those policies into people. So now that we know a little bit of why we use EiE data, here are the global public goods. So the tools that we've developed. The first one is a conceptual framework. I'm going to explain a little bit more in detail later on, but it's a set of common understandings, common concepts of how to use EiE data jointly by different actors. The second one is a set of diagnosis tools. that are going to help us understand how well countries are doing in terms of EiE data, what the main data needs are, what the main data gaps, what the hazards are that could affect education in those countries, etc. The third one is a set of guidelines for EiE data institutionalization. So those are going to be recommendations on ways in which we can make EiE data be central at the debate on how to manage education data. So I'm going to go down into each one of those tools to present them more in detail. The first one being the conceptual framework. So as I was saying, those are shared concepts and understanding, in particular between humanitarians and development actors. So sometimes there is criticism that humanitarians and development actors do not work together. So they work in silos, using different definitions, using different work streams, and using different data. So the conceptual framework is sort of like promoting a way for collaboration and for joint integration of different EiE data sources. It is also the common grounding into which we're going to build the other two tools that I'm going to present. So here's the conceptual framework itself. Obviously, like this is just like a quick summary. It's a much larger publication, and I encourage you all to look at it. But just to give you a sense of the fact that we're looking into the importance of EiE data across the 4 different dimensions of the disaster risk management. So the first one being prevention, so trying to prevent disasters from happening. The second one being preparedness, so preparing for disasters that you cannot prevent. Responding to disasters if you do not prepare well enough, and then recovering from them once they happened. So the conceptual framework explains the different ways in which EiE data is important across those 4 dimensions of disaster risk management. It also explains the needs of EiE data for interventions, for measuring the impact of different risks, the potential impact of risks into the education system, and it suggests ways in which we can use the EiE data for different purposes on planning. So now going down to the second tool. So the first tool will give us the main concepts that we need to understand the use of EiE data. The second tool will be a diagnosis. So those are 6 different tools that will help us first understand what the main hazards are in a given country. So are those floods or like civil unrest, or is there like a massive refugee influx that we need to adapt to, or drought? So we're going to see all the different hazards that could affect a country. We're going to see the data needs. So what kind of data do we need to make sure that we measure those hazards and we can anticipate their possible impact into education? And then we're going to put together all the different data sources in the country, and we're going to see if those different data sources, they're jointly capable of measuring those hazards and their impact or not. After that, we're going to evaluate the quality of the different data sources. So we have a tool to evaluate EMIS, which is a very large and like usually the major data source in every country, but we also have a lighter version for other data sources. At the end, what we get and what's crucial with this tool are the data gaps. So those are the areas in which we have to improve the data system in a given country to make sure that it fully captures all the data needs. So to make sure that we have enough data to know everything that's going on in terms of crisis and risk management, and that we have the appropriate data to move ahead with it. So here's a quick example. This is Jordan and various different data sources available in Jordan. So Jordan has plenty of international organizations operating in the country. It has a very robust and competent Ministry of Education. So they have various different data sources. You don't have to go through all of them, but it's just to give you a sense of like how much data there is available. And then what we do with this tool is that we try to map every single one of those data sources and try to get a sense of everything. So who collects the data? What are the main epistemological rationale behind the data? What are the areas in which the data is being collected? And then we see when we have all the different data sources mapped, we see what is missing. So how can we do better? So what are the improvements that we recommend in Jordan? And then what we see here from the diagnosis is that we can suggest improvements in various different ways. So this is one example of the assessment of the EMIS system in Jordan. And we assessed it in terms of relevance, of timeliness, consistency, accessibility. And what we see is that there are areas where there is more work to be done. So for example, in terms of consistency of the statistics, and there are areas where the EMIS system is already more robust. So for example, in terms of clarity of the presentation of the stats. So the second tool is sort of like this diagnosis. It gives us a sense of what's going on in the EiE data ecosystem in the country and what can be done. So now the third tool is a set of guidelines for data institutionalization. So as you can see very graphically here, we put EiE data right in the center, right? So this publication, which is a report, tries to give recommendations of ways in which we can ensure that EiE data is at the center of the debate, both in education data and in terms of the whole humanitarian work. So the guidelines will suggest ways in which we can institutionalize that data. It could be in terms of like better coordination practices, better capacity. So that's work for the IIP, because that's what we do. We increase capacity of our member states. It can be in terms of like incentives. It can be in terms of resources, policies. There are various different ways in which we can change and improve data system to make sure that education emergencies data is considered and is at the center. So I understand that it's all theoretical. The idea here is to give you a sense of what we're doing so you can then go and read all our publications that are available online. But I'm going to give a few country examples before my colleagues go more into detail. So that's very quickly. For example, Galo is going to go down into the Ecuador example, but just to give you a sense of what do we do in the real world. So in Ecuador, for example, we used the tools, we got to a diagnosis, and then we suggested ways to improve some key data sources in the country. So we suggested new questions that should be added, areas that were like blind spots in the education system data. And we developed jointly with the Ministry of Education, sort of like this roadmap on like what can be done, how can we improve, and how can we make sure that we capture all the different issues concerning education and emergencies. Then in Jordan, right here, what we did is we developed diagnosis that was used for the country risk management strategy. So going back to that first slide, you see that like we're trying to feed into data in all the steps of the planning cycle, right? So here we're planning, we're developing a strategy, and we're trying to make sure that this strategy is informed by the data evidence in Jordan. So that's what we did. We did a little report that gives the data evidence that is needed for the strategy. Then here, third example, and then my colleague Frost will also give a little bit more context on it. We also
Diego, you need to conclude.
Sorry. Yeah. So last slide. UNRWA. Frost is going to give more context on it. We went through the 5 contexts where UNRWA operates and analyzed ways in which we can improve the UNRWA MS for 2023 and 2027. Next steps, dissemination. That's what we're doing right now. So making sure that those tools are visible and making sure that all those tools are part of the general EiE system diagnosis. So they're available online. Happy for you all to use it and to ask questions if you have. And then I'll pass the word back to Martin.
Thank you, Diogo. We will have time then for more discussion on the tools and the ideas you propose. So now, please, Frost, over to you, and thank you again for being with us today.
Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to be presenting from the experience of UNRWA. UNRWA is the UN agency responsible for Palestine refugees. We are a direct service provider in the sense that we run over 700 schools and 8 technical vocational training centers and 2 teacher education universities. We basically, our data system, we kind of operate like a Ministry of Education in the sense that we have our own education management information system. We depend on data that has to do with class formation that we collect annually. We also depend on data that we collect from other UNRWA programs like the health, relief and social services, and human resources data. We depend on external national data sources like Bureau of National Data Statistics, and we have our own strategic indicators and education and emergency indicators that we report on regularly. We also conduct our own studies that inform these indicators, such as measuring student learning outcomes and classroom observation studies, such as examples. We can go on the next slide. As Diogo mentioned, we very much our education and emergency data does not stand separate. It's part of our EMIS. It builds on the data systems that we have, and this is key for us. But we have cooperated with IIP on the study that was done on identification of educational data needs in emergency settings. We conducted a workshop that Diego facilitated last May 2023, if I remember correctly, and we looked at what data we have, and we identified together with field colleagues what data gaps that we have and we need to improve, and we took this into account when we were developing further our education management information system strategy. Can we go in the next slide? But today I would like to zoom into a real life example, which is the Gaza emergency that we're dealing with at the moment, and how we have managed to use the data that we have in our education management information system in informing our planning for this emergency, despite the different challenges that we're facing. In Gaza, we operate 288 schools that run in 183 complexes. We have 2 vocational training centers, and there has been, as you know, probably from the news, there has been no education since early October, and students by now lost their school year, unfortunately. There have been attacks on our education premises and education personnel as well. The fact that we have a strong education management information system in place and data systems in place, we were able to quickly put in place in October a first education in emergency response plan that starts with focus on MHPSS and then moving into non-formal education and then formal education. But given that the crisis is still ongoing, there has been no ceasefire, it's in its 8th month now, we continuously had to revisit this plan and look at different scenarios in how we operated. But we very much in developing the plan depended on the data that we have in the system, when communication with our Gaza field team was basically cut at the beginning. Like we didn't have any communication with our Gaza education team in the start when we were developing this plan. The next slide, please. So currently, the data sources that we use in this emergency, it's a 2 ways, because we use these data sources, but we also report into this data, is the education cluster 5W system. We have the UNRWA situation reports that we produce on daily basis, and they include data on activities that we implement at this stage in psychosocial and recreational activities for children. We depend on studies and reports on MHPSS and the situation in Gaza that were implemented since the crisis started by other partners as well. And also on the UNRWA data systems that are beyond only education, such as the safety and security system, and like as I mentioned, health and relief and social services. The next slide, please. And this is just an example of a recent assessment that we participated in, or a study that we were able to feed into data from UNRWA, which is the Rapid Damage Needs Assessment that was conducted by the World Bank, the UN, and the EU in last February. This is an initial assessment on the impact of the war in Gaza on damages on infrastructure. And for example, just to give examples of the data that were requested, the school gender, school grades, the surfaces in square meters, the school sizes, the number of shifts, student capacities. So all these data, we managed to find a lot of it in our education management information system, but also in the class formation data that we collect annually, as well as in the other data systems that sit within UNRWA. So this is just an example of where we're at. We're working further to strengthen our system and to integrate all our data systems to try to see that they in a way, there's an interface between the different data systems that sit within UNRWA. And we're also working further to strengthen our EMIS system as well. So I will stop at this point, and then I will look forward to the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Froz, for the presentation and also for the work you are doing in difficult context. And I'm gonna now invite our next speaker, Galo Lopez. Galo, es tu turno.
Muy buenos días con cada uno de ustedes.
You have to turn the translation. Adelante, adelante.
Ok. Muy buenos días con cada uno de ustedes. Galo López les
Good
saluda,
morning,
director nacional
ladies
de
and
análisis e
gentlemen.
información educativa
I'm
del
Galo
Ministerio de
Lopez, the
Educación del
National
Ecuador. Voy a
Director
comentarles con respecto al tema de la política
of
pública educativa
Education,
desde la
Analysis and
evidencia,
Information at the Ministry of
en
Ecuador.
donde,
I'm going to talk about the public education policy on
claro, dentro del estatuto
factual
orgánico de
data.
esta cartera de Estado, está
Now,
conformado
within
por el Ministerio de Educación,
the
obviamente, luego viene la Coordinación
organic
General de
statute of
Planificación
the
y la Dirección Nacional de
ministry,
Análisis e Información
we
Educativa, a la cual
have the
pertenezco, en
general
donde acá dentro de la
coordination
misión
for
está de proveer de información
of
oportuna,
planning. I belong
veraz
to this
y
unit, and the
efectiva.
objective of
En
this
este
is
sentido,
to
como un antecedente,
provide
tenemos que el
timely,
Ministerio de Educación
accurate,
históricamente
effective, and reliable information. The Ministry of
reportaba
Education, from a
indicadores
historical
del Plan Nacional de
perspective,
Desarrollo como para poderse medir a través de
has
fuentes externas a
published
esta
some
cartera de Estado, en este
indicators
caso de la Encuesta Nacional de
in order
Empleo,
to
Desempleo y
have
Subempleo
an
en ENDE,
assessment
que lo
on
produce el Instituto Nacional de Estadística y
external
Censo.
data.
Entonces,
Now,
¿qué es
all
lo que
this
nosotros
is
hicimos como ministerio?
produced by the
Fue aplicar un
National
modelo de
Institute
producción
of
estadística,
Statistics and
que
Census. So
dicho
what
sea
we
de
did
paso, lo lidera
was
el
we
INE a
had a
través del
statistical
Sistema
production
Estadístico
model,
Nacional desde el año 2014, y con cada
which
una de estas fases, lo que es planificación,
is reporting to
diseño,
the statistical
construcción,
system, and we
recolección,
have
procesamiento,
planning,
análisis, difusión y
construction, data
evaluación,
collection,
vimos la
processing,
fortaleza para
analysis,
poder generar
publication, and
estadísticas
evaluation.
basadas en
And this
registros
really
administrativos.
helped us
¿Qué es lo que ocasionó?
build
Ocasionó que al
statistics
realizar un
on
inventario a la interna
administrative
de esta cartera de Estado,
registries. So
encontramos algunos
what was the
sistemas que
effect? So
producen
we
información
had
como se visualiza
we took
actualmente.
stock within our ministry,
Entonces,
and we
lo que logramos
saw
realizar
that
es
there were
unificar
certain
cada una
services
de
that
estos
produced
sistemas,
statistical data,
obviamente gracias también
and
a
we
los resultados que se generaron
unified
a
all
través
this
de
system.
la
We
prueba
linked them,
piloto de educación de
thanks to the
emergencia
results
realizada
that were
por el ISPE y el
obtained
IPE como tal, en donde nos
from
dieron
the
ciertas
pilot
recomendaciones
education
para poder
study
unificar
on
lo que se llama el
emergency
Archivo Maestro de
situation
Instituciones Educativas,
and
el Sistema de Gestión
education
Docente,
emergency
Gestión de
situation. And
Inscripción y
we have
Asignación,
a master
Gestión de
file.
Instituciones
We
y
had
Establecimientos
a teacher
Educativos,
management
asimismo
system.
como un sistema que es para las
We
calificaciones
have
como
the
tal de
school
cada uno de los
violence
estudiantes, el sistema
registration
de REDEVI, que es el
system,
sistema de registro de violencia,
teacher
entre otros
management
sistemas.
system, master
Es muy
file
importante
of
manifestar que esta
education
cartera de
systems, and
Estado del
amongst
Ministerio de
others,
Educación
we
del
also
Ecuador
have the salary distribution
responde
system.
a
So
todo lo que
this
es el
part
Sistema
of
Nacional de
the
Educación y tenemos
ministry
información de registros totalmente
covers
nominalizados.
the
Es decir, tenemos
entire
los nombres y
national
apellidos de
network,
cada
and we
uno de los
also have
estudiantes
the
que conforman el sistema,
nominal
de cada
registry.
uno
So
de
we've
los
got the names and the
sostenimientos, como el
surnames
del
of all
sostenimiento fiscal,
pupils
discomisional,
at the
municipal y
national level,
particular,
whether
asimismo como el
these are
desglose de lo que son las
national,
instituciones educativas y
regional, or
los
local
docentes que lo
schools.
conforman.
And
Posterior a
we
ello,
also have a
realizamos a
series of
través de
lists from other institutions. Now,
interoperabilidad o
after this,
excepcionalidad,
uh,
unión de las bases con
there was an
diferentes instituciones públicas. Como
interoperability
se
exercise
presenta,
that was
tenemos ya unido con el
conducted, and we
Registro
could
Civil,
bring together
Ministerio
all
de
these
Salud Pública, el
databases with
Instituto
the
Nacional de Evaluación, el Instituto
Public Health
Nacional de Estadística y Censo, la
Ministry,
Secretaría Técnica y Poder
registries, the
Prestación de Nutrición, y
National
estamos en proceso con
Census
otras
Institute, the
instituciones como
Secretarial,
lo
the
que es el
Technical
Seguro Social, el
Secretariat
Servicio de
for
Rentas Internas,
fight
la
against
Fuerza Armada,
malnutrition, and
Policía
other
Nacional y
institutions
ONG.
such as social services, army,
Esto lo que
police, NGOs,
Dame un
amongst
segundito solo
others.
para pedirle si podemos ver la presentación en modo full.
Now,
Si va arriba a configuración de la,
could
de
you
la visualización,
please display
ahí
the
cambiar en verde. Muchísimas gracias. Disculpe.
muy bien.
presentations in this format. Thank you so much,
Luego de ello,
and
¿qué es
sorry
lo
for
que
having
ocasionó?
interrupted you.
Que anteriormente nosotros
Now,
disponíamos solo de fuente externa a este
what
Ministerio
happened
de
after
Educación,
this?
con
Before,
la
we
aplicación
only
del
had
modelo de
external
progresión
sources of
estadística que día a día se va
information,
fortaleciendo,
and with
cambiamos ya
this
el
new
PAI, en
model,
donde ya
we
nosotros
have
estamos utilizando los registros
strengthened our
administrativos que les mencioné
infrastructure,
y
and now
dejamos
we
de utilizar
use
solo fuente externa a
administrative
utilizar
registers
cada
that
uno de
I
nuestros registros,
spoke
lo cual
about,
nos va a
and we
permitir,
also
entre
have
otras
stopped
fortalezas,
using
tener
external sources.
indicadores
We've
que
got our
sean
own
más
registries,
desagregados a
and
nivel
this
parroquial
has
y poder
some
llegar hasta
advantages.
inclusive a
We
nivel de
have
institución educativa en caso que se presente algún
indicators
área.
that are
Como
more
otros resultados,
granular
nosotros
and
tenemos una
finer,
herramienta
and
digital
we
que
could
se
actually
llama
use
datos
this
abiertos,
to
en
the
donde en
fullest.
esta
We also have
herramienta
a
digital
digital
datos
tool
abiertos,
called
más
Datos
allá de
Abiertos,
contar
which is
con un
open data,
visualizador como tal, ¿verdad?
and
Nosotros
we
disponemos de
have
aquí
certain
información
displays, as you can
histórica desde el
see,
año
and this
2008 hasta el
has allowed us to have some
2023-2024
kind
que
of
está en curso y el
log or
2024-2025 con
history
respecto
from
al régimen
2008 to
Costa.
2023,
Aparte de ello, de
24,
presentar información
and
totalmente
then from
agregada y con esa
2024 to
desagregación,
2025. So
tenemos
here
también
we have
documentos analíticos como lo que
information
se
that
llama Estadística
is
Educativa volumen número
quite
4 y estamos
fine.
encaminados para poder
Analytical, we
obtener el
have
volumen número 5.
education information
Asimismo,
on
donde
education
tenemos otra
statistics,
publicación
and
como el
we
contexto
are now going
educativo,
to
en
get the
donde en
fifth
esta
version.
volumen número
There
2
are
y
other
volumen número 1,
publications such as the
básicamente
education
concentra
context,
nuevos
part one and
indicadores
part
que se le
two,
opone a la sociedad para el debate y así
which
poder generar
bring
indicadores del
together
sector educativo que
indicators
permitan mejorar y
on
fortalecer la
the
política pública.
education
Además de
sector,
ello,
and this really
disponemos de
will
las
help
bases de
us
datos en donde les
improve
sabemos
public policy in this
poner en
field. We also have
transparencia a través
data
de
banks
formato CSV y en
that
XLSX. De igual forma, contamos con
provide
tabulados
us with
históricos en
files
donde
in
se le
different
pone a la
format. We also
disposición a
have
cada uno de los
Excel
usuarios para que pueda
spreadsheets with
tener
all
información
the
tanto
historical
absoluto como
information,
relativo
and
dependiendo de los
this is made
indicadores que
available
se
to
lo digan.
users so
Aparte
that
de ello,
they
disponemos de
can
lo que es la
see
agenda
the
de
indicators they
investigación
wish
educativa
to.
del 2026,
Moreover,
en
you
donde
also
aquí se
have
encuentran ciertas áreas de
the
interés con respecto
agenda
a
on
la
education
realidad del
research
Ecuador,
for
en la cual indica a los
2016,
investigadores,
and
tanto
here
internos
you've
y
got
externos de esta cartera de Estado, a
data
poder
on
hacer buen uso de la
from
información y así
Ecuador,
de esa
and
manera poder
you
realizar
have both
investigaciones in situ,
internal and
obviamente con el
external
acompañamiento
researchers
del
who
Ministerio de
can
Educación.
learn to use the
Además de
information,
ello,
carry out
disponemos de
research
un manual de fichas
under the
metodológicas en
supervision of the
donde aquí
aegis of the
concentra
Ministry
los
of Education.
principales
There's also
indicadores
a
del Ministerio de Educación del
methodology
Ecuador,
manual that brings
obviamente
together
desde la tasa bruta de
the
matriculado de
main
cada uno de los niveles, asimismo como la tasa neta,
that
el
brings
tema de lo que
together
se llama
like information
el tema
such
del
as
rezago
the
escolar,
gross
así como también otros
enrollment
indicadores que lo
rate
van a permitir
and
desagregar y
other
ver un
types of
poco más allá de lo que
indicators that
corresponde el
help us
ministerio como
break
tal.
down
Y finalmente, sin ser
data
menos
and
importante,
provide more
disponemos de un calendario de
body
estadística
to
educativa
research.
en donde
And the
de
last
forma
point,
transparente
but not the
publicamos y
least,
decimos
is
en qué
there is
fechas, en qué
also
momento
a
cierta
kind of
información se va a
calendar.
actualizar en esta herramienta digital de datos
This
abiertos
is
con el
where
objeto para evidentemente poner a
we
la ciudadanía
see
a
when the
disposición un dato que sea
information will
totalmente
be
veraz,
updated on the
oportuno
digital
y sobre
tool
todo de
so
calidad.
that public opinion
Como
has access to
visualizadores
all this
complementarios
information
disponemos algunos, como
in a
anteriormente se
timely way.
visualizó que teníamos
We also
16,
have
pero en esta
other
ocasión
visuals or
voy a
displays.
enfocarme en lo que es el
Now,
visualizador de
we
los
only have
inoculados
16, but here I'm
COVID-19,
going to give
en
you an
donde, claro,
overview
como un
on
ejemplo y una
the
evidencia y un caso totalmente real,
on
el Ministerio de
vaccination
Educación, a través del tema de
for
la interoperabilidad y o
COVID-19. Now, this is all
excepcionalidad con otra
evidence,
cartera de Estado,
and
en
the
este caso
Ministry of
con el Ministerio de
Education,
Salud
within the
Pública,
framework of
se logró obtener el cruce de
interoperability,
información
along with
totalmente
an
nominal, en donde
other
el Ministerio
ministry,
de
the
Salud
Public Health
Pública nos
Ministry,
depositaba
has matched
semanalmente su
nominal
información
information.
del
So
100% de las
every week, the
personas que en su
Ministry of Health
momento
provides us
empezó el
with
proceso de
information
inoculación, es decir,
on
los que contaban
all
con
the
una
people
vacuna,
who
con
have
dos vacunas, con
started
tres vacunas e
participating
incluso
in the
de los que no
vaccination
contaban.
campaign.
¿Cuál era
So
el
who's
objeto?
have
El objeto era que
already
una vez que estábamos
one dose
nosotros
or the second dose,
totalmente
no, and the
usando
second
esta
dose as well.
información,
Now, what's
logramos
the objective behind all
identificar
this? Now,
la
once we
cantidad de
use this
estudiantes
information,
de nosotros
we
quienes ya
can
contaban con
see
una
the
dosis de
number of
refuerzo, con una
students
dosis
who've been
completa o con solo
vaccinated,
una
who've
primera dosis
already
o
had their
simplemente no
booster
tenía
dose,
todavía.
or of
Como
students
ustedes
who
pueden
are who
visualizar,
have had
aquí
only
tenemos
one
por cada
dose, and
uno de los
students who
niveles
haven't been vaccinated
educativos,
as yet.
desde grupo
As
de
you
3
can
años,
see,
o
we've got
también
the
llamado inicial 1,
various
hasta el tercero de
education
bachillerato.
levels,
es muy
age
importante aquí
groups from
enfatizar
3
que si bien es cierto,
to
en las edades
students who
cortas,
are in
¿verdad?
high school.
Prevalece el tema del sin
Now,
registro.
it's true
Resulta que el
that
tema de la vacuna se lo
young,
dio más fuerza
we
para
have
la población
less
de 5
data
años en
for
adelante, es decir,
students
era
who are very
obligatorio de
young.
5 años
the vaccine is actually administered as of 5 years. So below that, it's completely done on a voluntary basis. And we've also seen the districts where the vaccination rate was the highest. And this has basically allowed us to know that such and such percentage of the population has already been vaccinated. You also have provinces and cantons and municipalities where vaccination has taken place. So we can say that now we could have face-to-face classes in schools. Now for teachers, we've done the same thing. Obviously, we have had very specific information, whether it's for the vaccination regime, the first dose, and as you can see on the top, you have people who've had their booster doses and their entire vaccination. So we also have data on the administrative staff. Now, this is the staff who are working in the educational institutions and who work with the education community. And as the ministry, this helped us to take informed decision and help children get back to classes. And each of all this information is something that you can find on this application, Datos Objetos. You will have all types of data, relative data, and you'll also have methodological sheets with the various indicators and other types of information that will help you better understand and have a helicopter view of the education system in Ecuador. The statistical production, analysis, and research is not an end in itself. These are inputs for policy generation and decision making on behalf of the population. Thank you so much for your for your attention, and we would be delighted to reply to you. Thank you so much, Gallo, for this presentation, which was very interesting on the education system in Ecuador.
I would like to remember you that you can ask your questions through the chat. So maintenant, c'est votre tour, Monsieur Benjamin.
Mr. Benjamin, it's now your turn.
Donc, vous m'entendez? Bonjour à tous.
Can you hear me?
Bonjour.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Vous m'entendez bien?
Can you hear me?
Alors, donc, c'est un
Yes.
plaisir pour moi. Je me nomme
It's a
Oumoudou
pleasure
Benjamin.
for me
Je viens du
to be
Burkina
here.
Faso et
I
je
come
suis
from
le
Burkina Faso,
chef de département études et
and I
prospectives
am
au
the
secrétariat technique de
head of
l'éducation en
department
situation
at the
d'urgence
Technical
du
Secretariat for
ministère en charge de
Education in
l'éducation
Emergency
et de
Situations at the
l'alphabétisation de la
Ministry of
promotion des
National
langues
Education,
nationales.
Literacy, and the
Alors, donc,
Promotion
je
of
voulais
National
être
Languages.
assez
Now, I would like
puritain pour rester dans les 2-5 minutes. Donc,
to be
mes
very
diapos ne sont pas
concise, so
longues,
my
hein, c'est juste
slides are not in
5,
great
6, 7.
numbers. As you
Alors
can see,
donc,
I've
vous
just
pouvez
got 5 or
circuler.
6
Oui, voilà.
slides, so
Alors
you
donc,
can
en
actually
termes
show them.
d'introduction, qu'est-ce
So,
qu'il faut retenir?
so what can I say for my
Il faut dire que le
introduction?
secrétariat technique de
The
l'éducation en
Technical
situation
Secretariat
d'urgence
of
portait
the
sur les fonds bâtis
Education in Emergencies
en,
regularly collects
en
statistical data
2019
in regions.
pour
And
s'occuper de la
in
crise que le
2019, there was
Burkina
a
connaît
major
à travers son
crisis
système
in
éducatif. Ce
Burkina
secrétariat technique collecte
Faso.
régulièrement des
So
données,
this secretariat
les
collects
compile,
data on a regular basis, they
les traite,
compile
les
it,
analyse et
and they
produit des rapports
process it,
à
they
travers un
produce reports,
mécanisme
they
qui a été
analyze
élaboré
it
par le
through a
DIEN
mechanism that has
l'IDE.
been developed.
Alors, donc, à la fin, comme je l'ai dit, à des
So
rapports
as I
de
said,
conclusion qui
the
permettent aux autorités
reports
du pays
help
de prendre des décisions
authorities
avisées par
to
rapport à
take
la réponse
informed
appropriée à cette situation de
decisions
crise.
with regard
Ça
to
permet
the
également aux
response
différentes
to be provided to the crisis. It
ONG
also allows different
partenaires
NGOs,
techniques et financiers
partners,
de pouvoir
both
mieux
technical and
orienter
financial
leur
partners, to better
intervention à travers ce que
orient their
nous produisons comme
interventions
données.
and their
Par
action
ailleurs aussi, les
plans.
chercheurs
Moreover,
utilisent ce biais pour
researchers also use this
approfondir les domaines de
data to
recherche.
deepen their research.
Diapo.
Next slide, please.
Diapo. Oui, vous pouvez
So
passer,
as you
voilà,
can
très bien.
see,
Alors, donc, ici, vous avez le logigramme.
you have the flow chart on how the data is processed. Please come back to the first slide. Now, this flow chart is about data processing. Can you go back to the flow chart, please?
Oui, s'il vous plaît. Voilà, présentez le diapo suivant. Voilà, restez ici. Quand je vais finir, je vais vous dire de passer à nos diapos.
Please stay here and I'll tell you when to move. Now here, the Secretariat, along with the Sector Statistics Department, produces data. They develop data collection tools, they revise tools, and they send these tools to the regional directors. And this regional department dispatch the tools according to 4 variables.
Et chaque entité
and
qui renseigne
each entity compiles, processes tools and sends them to the next level. And when it comes to the national level, there is a database that's built. And there are dynamic tables that are produced that help us produce the reports. So I'll come back to this if you need any more details. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Right. So I just showed you the mechanism of data collection and processing. Now I'm going to tell you how this data is useful to all the stakeholders. Information coming from the EiE data is used by the various ministries of education. In Burkina Faso, you've got the Ministry of University Education and the Ministry of National Education, basically the schools, the preschools, primary, post-primary, and secondary. So the information from this EiE data is also used by NGOs, researchers, and various partners and entities in charge of defense. So they basically take data from us to build action plans that truly meet the requirements of each problem. Now, this data is also used to develop education policies tailored to real needs. Now, there is a mission in Burkina Faso, the cities to develop a new strategy. And this data is also used to manage and steer the education system as a whole. So, since you have institutional stakeholders and humanitarian stakeholders, and we are working as a nexus, so we're going to basically coordinate development action and humanitarian action from time, and all this would contribute to fostering the resilience of the system. Now, the humanitarians have been actually working in silos, but thanks to our reports and thanks to orientations from the government, their work is better coordinated. Next slide, please. Now, all what I've told you is great, but there are some stumbling blocks, some problems. You see, some collection operators are not familiar with certain items on the collection tool. Now, there are for primary, there are 38 columns. For the post-primary, there are 40 columns. Now, in order to constitute a database,
Et pour
you
pouvoir
have to take
emboîter,
a
puis faire les
base
emboîtements,
of
puis faire
40
sortir une
columns,
base
and you've
complète.
got
Donc
to
l'outil est assez, il y a beaucoup
actually
de filatures.
sometimes
Ça fait que par
remove a
moment,
column.
la
So
compréhension
again,
de cette filature pose
it's
problème
really
à
hard to
certains agents
understand
collecteurs.
certain
Il y a aussi
items
le
for
mauvais
certain
remplissage.
operators. Then you've
Le
got the
fait que
incorrect filling
l'outil
of the
doit
tool.
descendre
The
constamment chaque mois
tool
pour être
must be
renseigné,
filled
fait que par
each
moment, les acteurs se
month.
lassent. Ils sont fatigués
And
parce qu'ils ont
sometimes
d'autres
the
occupations en plus
stakeholders
de ce
are
qu'ils doivent
fed up
faire.
because they
Donc, ils
have
se
other
débarrassent
things
par
to
moment.
do.
Eh ben,
So
il y
they
a un mauvais remplissage par moment. C'est pas de
they
bonne
do
foi,
not do
mais
it
c'est suite à ce
properly,
qu'ils ont comme pression de
and
travail général. Il y a aussi la mobilité
due
du
to
personnel chez nous au
pressure, and then
Burkina,
there's also
parce
staff
que vous êtes sans
mobility.
savoir qu'un agent public chez nous, s'il est dans un poste donné, il peut
When
demander à un
I
certain
mean, a
moment de rejoindre
public
une autre ville, par exemple.
civil
Donc, si vous
servant
avez
can't
affaire
be
à un
moved
collecteur qui est
to or
chevronné,
transferred to
il demande à
another
partir comment le remplacer. S'il n'y a pas un remplacement,
part
du coup,
of the
ça joue sur la collecte de
administration.
cette région.
So that
Il y a
again,
aussi le délai de
impacts the
transmission des
work.
données.
Then there's the
Les
failure to make
différents responsables
deadlines
au
for
niveau régional
submitting
chargent
tools and
les
reports.
chargés de statistiques de travail, si bien que ils déposent les outils de
Now,
côté. Après, ils se rendent compte que l'outil devrait être
sometimes
lancé et transmis le plus rapidement
stakeholders
possible. Donc, ça joue sur les
fill
délais.
in
Et il y
and
a
actually send
l'insuffisance
the
et la
report
vétusté du
very
matériel informatique dans nos pays
quickly.
du
So,
Sud,
and there's
que vous
also the
connaissez,
problem of
et la
inadequate and
sempiternelle
obsolete
question
computer equipment,
de la
and
connexion
internet connection
Internet.
is
Donc
problematic.
ça, c'était le paquet
So
de
these are
difficultés que rend
some
la
of
collecte
the
difficile. En termes de
difficulties
suggestions, qu'est-ce que nous demandons aux acteurs?
facing
Nous,
data
avec les
collection. So
partenaires,
what are
par
the
moment, nous
suggestions
renforçons les
now?
capacités,
We
justement,
would like
compte
to
tenu des
build the
difficultés qu'ils
capacity
rencontrent.
of collection
Donc, les SERP, c'est les
agents
entités au
at
niveau
the
déconcentré, les DP sont les directions
deconcentrated level,
provinciales et les
at the
DR sont les directions
provincial
régionales.
level, and
Aussi,
at
nous
the
appelons en
regional
termes de
level.
suggestions à ce que les
We
différents responsables
also
au
would
niveau
like that
régional
the
déconcentré
various
suivent le travail
managers
de
at the
ce que les collecteurs font.
devolved level
Parce que quand ils suivent le
monitor
travail,
the
ils posent des
work
questions,
of the
ça
data
permet à ces
collection
gens-là de
agents.
corriger rapidement les imperfections.
That way,
Il y a par
any
ailleurs
kind of
aussi
errors
les
can be
échanges. Nous
promptly
avons des plateformes
corrected.
entre nous,
We also
chargés de
have
statistiques. Quand il y
data
a une difficulté, on passe
collection
par ces
agent
plateformes-là rapidement
platforms,
pour rattraper ce qui
and
doit
there
être
should be
rattrapé.
these
Donc, nous
where
poursuivons les
continued
échanges notamment
discussions
à
take
l'issue du
place
traitement de
on
façon
certain
opérationnelle
key
par mois.
points of this
Il faut aussi
tool.
assurer la maintenance
You
régulière du
also have
matériel.
to
C'est-à-dire que
regularly ensure
du
the
matériel
maintenance, the upkeep
informatique. Vous
of the
savez que nous,
IT
dans
equipment.
le processus de dotation
In
de nos structures, comme on n'a pas
our
suffisamment de moyens, donc le matériel est
we do
doté
not
une
have
fois
a
assez
lot of
longtemps.
resources,
Donc,
and
c'est ce matériel qui est
sometimes
pressuré, utilisé à tout moment. Il
the
faut par moment
equipment
procéder
is
à sa maintenance.
obsolete
On peut
and
passer à la
hence
dernière,
has
au dernier
to
diapo.
basically be maintained
Alors, donc, en termes
in a
de
proper way.
conclusion, qu'est-ce qu'il faut dire?
Last
Il
slide,
faut dire que
please.
la chaîne de collecte
So,
de données au
conclusion.
Burkina
The
Faso,
data
dans le
collection
domaine des urgences, fait
chain
intervenir un ensemble
involves
d'acteurs à viser des questions.
whole
Du niveau
range of
central jusqu'au niveau
players at
déconcentré. Le niveau
both
central
central
renvoie au
and
ministre,
decentralized levels.
son
And at
cabinet,
the
le
central
secrétaire
level, you've
général,
got
son
the
cabinet, les directions centrales.
ministers,
Maintenant, les niveaux déconcentrés sont les
and at the
entités qui sont hors
deconcentrated
du
level,
niveau
you've got
central. Les directions
entities
régionales,
at
les directions
the
provinciales, les
regional and the
circonscriptions d'éducation
provincial
de base,
levels,
des établissements, ainsi de suite.
and all
Il faut dire que
kinds
ces
of
données
other
sont
institutions.
collectées,
So the
présentent
data
les
is
situations des
collected, it
établissements à un
presents
temps
the
donné
situation of
et
the
sont susceptibles d'être
establishment at a
renforcées
given
ou
time,
révisées.
and
Le
is
défi
likely
majeur
to
pour nous est
be
de travailler
reinforced
à
or
plus
revised. The
de
major
fiabilité
challenge
de nos
is to
données.
work towards
Et
a
alors, c'est en cela,
greater
justement,
data
compte
reliability.
tenu de l'importance des données
Now,
pour
given
le
the
ministère de
importance of the
l'Éducation nationale et de ses
data for the
partenaires, un
ministry and
engagement
its
à tous les
partners, the
acteurs s'avère
commitment of
incontournable.
all
Donc, je me prête à vos
stakeholders is
questions et je
essential.
m'excuse par moment si j'ai été
So
peut-être un
I'm
peu long.
sorry if I was
Voilà,
very
c'est ce que
long,
je peux
and
vous
I'm
répondre
ready
comme
to take any
communication.
questions. Thank you so much.
Merci
Thank
beaucoup,
you,
Monsieur Benjamin.
Mr. Benjamin.
So now we would like to turn to a round table where we are gonna raise one question to the four panelists, and then they will address hopefully that question in 2 or 3 minutes. So one question will be how are education in emergency data and evidence used in your context to inform decision making? How are various stakeholders concretely making use of them? Can you please provide a specific illustration of it? So we can begin probably by Galo.
Muy amable, estimado Martín. Sí, El Ministerio de Educación, con el proceso de fortalecimiento del uso de los registros administrativos del Sistema Nacional de Educación, en 2 ocasiones le ha dado resultados, enhorabuena, favorable. En la primera, en la que ya había mencionado con el tema de COVID, estaba el 100% de los estudiantes y el sistema como tal en educación no presencial. Pero una vez que comienza el tema de las vacunas, ¿verdad? Cruzamos la información con el Ministerio de Salud Pública y se identificaron que instituciones educativas ya superaban entre el 75 y 80% de inoculación. Y con ello, entre otros criterios, obviamente con el tema de lo que es el Ministerio del Interior, Policía Nacional, Fuerza Armada, Ministerio de Salud Pública, etcétera, se decidió que ciertas instituciones ya vuelvan a la presencialidad. De esa manera que en ese periodo de tiempo, ¿verdad? Hubo un tema de recibir clases mixtas, lo presencial y lo no presencial. El otro momento fue acá en Ecuador, hace no menos de un año, se tuvo que volver otra vez a las casas, a la no presencialidad, por un tema del tema de seguridad a la interna.
So we had
¿Qué es
also
lo que
to work
ocasionó?
on
Ahora cruzamos
security.
información con lo que es Policía Nacional, Fiscalía, asimismo Ministerio de Salud Pública, el ECU 911, etcétera, en donde se fue identificando a nivel de mapa qué instituciones educativas, ¿verdad?, se encontraban cerca de los centros de privación de la libertad. Es decir, si estaba en un radio mayor a 2 kilómetros y que ese lugar o esa área fuera de ese radio tenga índices de inseguridad menores, las instituciones se les decía con nombre y apellido de una forma totalmente directa, ya no de forma masiva, sino directa, había una comunicación directa con los directivos de
With
cada
direct
institución
communication
educativa,
with
de los 4
everyone from
sostenimientos, que es
the
fiscal, fiscomisional,
educational planning
municipal y
from 4
particular, y se les
types. That
decía que
includes
vuelvan a la presencialidad
private,
como tal. Esto duró
municipal,
cerca de unas 6
private,
fases en donde
and others.
cada
And this
momento
lasted for
era
6
totalmente diferente, en la
phases,
cual
and
se
it was
notó que
different each
ciertas
time.
instituciones, al menos del régimen Costa,
And
que
it
ya no
showed that
lograron
during
volver
the
a la
Costa
presencialidad, finalicen su régimen escolar
regime, it showed that
2023-2024
it allowed for
de
everyone to
manera
finish
totalmente
their
no presencial. Y el
schooling
resto sí la
in
presencialidad. Al día de hoy
an
tenemos el
online manner.
100% ya de los estudiantes del Sistema Nacional de Educación en
We
la
also have
presencialidad como tal,
students
y
that
esto ha
are
permitido que a
attending
través del uso directo de los
and
datos, ¿verdad?,
completely
pueda
not remotely at all.
mejorar
And
y
this has
tomar
allowed us to
decisiones y
improve our
generar
data
política pública
and
para el
to
bien común acá en
provide
nuestro país.
public data
Son dos
for
puntos
good living in
the
Ecuador. These are two things that I can
and
pero evidentemente
improve the
cada una
education,
state with
and this is
completely
something that
concrete plans,
happened,
and you can access this with the platforms
was thanks
of
to
the
the
Ministry of Education
information
in Ecuador, and you
platform.
can see all the
You
results.
would have more information on the application if you wish.
Sure. I tried to touch on this question as part of my presentation, actually. So I hope I don't sound repetitive, but many of the data that we collect are grouped around 3 main groups. One is the students. We have student data in the systems. Then we have education personnel data, and then we have data on the premises. And we also collect other type of data that we do on, for example, in the indicators on dropout, student dropout levels, student enrollment data. We measure learning outcomes. And of course, all these data we use to inform planning, such as in the situation of Gaza. We use the data that we have in developing our emergency response plan and in its various revisions. We also use the data, for example, in participating in the rapid damage needs assessment that was led by the World Bank and other UN agencies and the EU. So we very much depend on the data that we have in our systems in order to inform our own planning, but also in participating with external studies, for example.
Thank you, folks. Diogo, you want to make a comment on this?
Yeah, no, I can make just 2 very quick examples, given that I already spoke too much in the beginning. So I'll just give 2 examples from the last 2 weeks on ways in which we use data at the IIP. So one example, Last week, I was in Zimbabwe and we're developing jointly with the Ministry of Education risk analysis. So those are ways in which we identify the main risks in countries, how they can affect the education system, and what are the capacities that exist on the ground for us to adapt and to prevent those risks from affecting the education system. Another example from 2 weeks ago from Ethiopia, we had a request from the government to help them develop a school placement tool. So it's a tool in which they know where to build schools in areas that are safe for children, that will make sure that the structure is appropriate for the various natural risks, that is appropriate for the upcoming challenges posed by climate change. So we're going to use the data that we have on those different hazards, the data on school location. We're going to propose ways in which we can build schools in areas that are safe and that are appropriate for learning.
Thank you, Yogo. Monsieur Benjamin, vous avez parlé de la participation de différents
Benjamin, you
acteurs,
talked about the participation of different stakeholders and players in the coordination of the information system. Can you give us examples of the way you use the data you propose? Examples of what? How do you use the information data in emergency situations? Yes, in Burkina Faso, for instance, in emergency situations, we have what we call cross-step in national education. So we have a meeting every last Tuesday of the month to assess the difficulties and the problems and challenges during the month. By challenges, I mean closing schools. Let's suppose that 20 schools are closed in a month. You have to call the different players so that they come with a quick response for certain schools. But we are the ones who say, well, there are so many schools closed and we explain why. We have to explain why the schools were closed. Is it because they were attacked by terrorists? Is it for preventative reasons? Is it because they heard about the possible terrorism? And is it a school that was burned and down, or etc.? But depending on the nature of the information, the school may be opened or closed. If it is open, internally displaced students in the system need all sorts of support. You may have to give them school kits, bicycles, nuts, many different things, and this should allow these internally displaced students to continue their education in situations of crisis. And these statistics allow us to take decisions on a daily basis, both for humanitarian players and the government players. And UNICEF helps us a lot in this field, more than any other NGOs. And the tools we use have been stabilized, and the document we have a document which allows us to do this kind of things, and all we do is based on scientific tools allowing us to collect data and take the necessary and bring in the necessary response to the problems and challenges. I hope I have answered your question. Yes, thank you, Mr. Benjamin. I believe we can now move on to questions now. We have quite a lot of questions, very interesting questions, and it will be very difficult for me to read them all. But I'm lucky I have a great team with me helping me to select
I'm gonna read the questions. Some of them are in French or English, so I hope that you will be able to change the channel. So I'm going to begin by a question from Merlin Witt. En considérant, the question is in French, en considérant que certains
considering that some governments tend to show in data in emergency situations in a very subjective way based on their interest, is there a way to guarantee the reliability of data in such a situation?
Do I repeat or is fine with the... So who wants to answer this critical question? De repente,
Si
vamos
me
a lo-
permiten.
Adelante.
I can go.
Listo. Efectivamente, en cada
Right.
proceso de recolección de
Indeed, in
información que
each
se realiza
data
dentro de las
collection
instituciones
process that
educativas del
we
país de Ecuador, lo que se hace con
do
los
in all
equipos que
educational
pertenecen
institutions in
a
Ecuador, what
zonas
we
o
do
distritos,
with
es
our
decir,
teams,
pertenecen a mejor
each team
Ecuador,
belongs
luego
to
viene
a
la
district.
provincia,
So let me
luego
show you.
viene
First, it's
cantón y
Ecuador,
estado
first it's the
y así.
province, then
Y
the
cada una de las
canton,
parroquias están
and then
conformadas o un grupo de parroquias forman
smaller
un
regions. And
circuito.
these
Y luego del circuito,
are
un conjunto de circuitos
a
vienen las
series of
zonales. Y
parishes
luego de las
that
zonales
are part of a
terminamos en
larger
la capital
circuit
Ecuador
that
en
end up
Quito, en
going
donde se encuentra planta
at a
central,
national
sede del
level, and
Ministerio de Educación. Bajo esa
we end up
lógica, nosotros generamos
working at a
reportes
national
en
level
donde
that
decimos, si hay una institución que
operates
por,
under the
para
Ministry
el
of
ejemplo
Education.
rápido, si tiene
To
1000
give you a quick
estudiantes de
example, if,
acuerdo
for
al
example,
equipo
we have
anterior y
1,000
ahora me reporta
students
600, enviamos
that,
una alerta
and
al
now you
circuito
tell me you
para
have
que visita la institución
600,
educativa y
we
con
send
ello
an alert
garantice
so
que
that
el número
the
de estudiantes, obviamente de
people in
forma
charge
nominal,
of that
se
region can
encuentre
go
totalmente
see what is going on and
y
to
poder
ensure
complementar
that
la
all
información y así poder tener la
educational
información
instruments
más
are
viable y
operating at
más
right
real
level, and
posible.
then we can
Dicho sea de
have
paso, esta información
real
nos sirve muchísimo, al
time
menos para
data,
el
and this
sostenimiento
information is
fiscal
extremely
y
valuable, at
municipal,
least
para que el Ministerio de Educación, en
at
conjunto con otras carteras de Estado,
town
pueda
level, so
brindar
that the
tipos de
Ministry of
recursos
Education as
académicos,
well as
como por
other
ejemplo la entrega de textos,
governmental entities can
uniformes
ensure
y alimentación escolar. Entonces, en ese sentido, hacemos lo
food at
posible para que
schools
la
as well as
información que se
proper
dispone dentro de este
book
registro de fiscal
distribution and
datos
others. And
abiertos
so
del Ministerio de
with
Educación
this
de Ecuador
open
sea lo
data
más
tool that
eficiente
we have in
posible y pueda
Ecuador
tener los
is the
estándares de
most
calidad de acuerdo
reliable
al modelo de
tool
profesional
possible,
que
and that it
establecemos.
follows all the standards that we
Gracias, Rafa.
follow.
I don't know if someone else
Thank
wants
you.
to make a comment on that question, on how to ensure the good quality of the data in context where there are some potential bad behaviors by governments related to data. No one? Okay. So let's go to another question, which is more on quality, and it's how to ensure compliance to quality data response with your respondents when dealing with especially fatigue from them in difficult contexts, I guess for both development and humanitarian context. Maybe Froze, you can address that question.
Yes, I think it's a question about how do we change the cultures around data systems, and how do we change how people perceive the data systems so that they see the value of entering data that is reliable, that is correct, and don't see these systems as a burden on them. So there is like these systems could be a two-way systems in which education data entry or the education the data providers see the value of these systems. So I think it's about changing really around the culture around these data systems, and having some code of ethics, for example, around how we use them. This is one way to ensure.
Good. Thank you, Froze. Maybe Diogo or Monsieur Benjamin?
Oui.
Sí, sur la question de comment
As to how
assurer la qualité de réponse dans des contextes
you can ensure a good quality response
les personnes qui répondent ils ont déjà de
in
la
a
fatigue,
context
dans des
where
contextes
people
difficiles.
who are supposed to respond are already tired because they live in a difficult area,
Un commentaire sur ça ou...
in a difficult situation. Do you have any comments
Vous
on
voulez
that?
dire que la situation de crise que nous
You mean
traversons
by that
pour dire que les
that
acteurs déjà sont
the
lassés par la crise,
crisis
c'est ça que vous voulez
situation
dire?
means that people are just a bit fed up with the
Oui,
situation?
c'est
This is what you
que
mean?
la question veut savoir si
I'm
s'il
tired
y
of the
a
situation. Yes.
une manière d'assurer
Is there a way
de la qualité de l'information dans des
to
contextes où les
ensure a
personnes
good
qui
quality
participent
education in a situation where
des études
people
ont
who
de la
are
fatigue, sont déjà
involved in
convaincus par la
surveys and studies
législation
are already
qui expérimentent, non?
tired and have a lot to do already in these difficult situations. Yes, but before answering your question, allow me to say something. Burkina Faso, contrary to what is said on the radios and TVs, we are a very resilient country. We have very good news, and as I'm speaking, we have about 1,400 schools which have been reopened in Burkina Faso. And this is a positive point. And secondly, I'm in Koudougou with other colleagues, and we're rereading the strategy to taking into account the most acute phase of the crisis, and we wanted to just implement remedial actions. We have what we call in direction des études, what we call the DGS, with people who are experts on statistics and who have been trained in major statistical schools. And they just assess everything we do. And we are supported by these experts who come to work with us wherever we go. Unfortunately, our EMIS, it's only recently that EMIS was integrated on the global platform, because our EMIS platform is made up of 70 different databases and all different structures making up the EMIS. But the quality of data is improved as the different players improve. And as I said, since the crisis is slowly going to be behind us, this is really an incentive for many people. So we have difficulties, we have remaining difficulties, but we are working on them, and many are improving. And we hope that by the next school year, very few schools will be closed, which explains why we're just cleaning our databases, because now we have about 5,300 schools closed, but in these schools, you have to remove all the old schools. It's a stock of schools. And the minister told us that we have to move towards a new database, and we have to collect the data we needed. In November, we will collect the October data, which will fuel the data for November, and we will end up with having reliable data. So the ministry follows the data, and we have data, the quality of the data is much better. That's what I can say for the time being. Thank you. Diogo, would you like to add something? No, I think that they have given an answer, so that should be sufficient. Okay. We have a lot of questions in French.
Je vais continuer avec d'autres types de questions liées à.
I will continue with other types of questions regarding articulation. I believe this is interesting. How can ensure interoperability with the databases of other ministries? What are the strategies to have the other ministries agree with this interoperability project?
So, probablement,
Ouais, donc en fait, la première chose, je crois que la plus importante quand on a plusieurs bases de données en même temps,
well, the first thing and the most important one when we have different databases at the same time is to have similar
par exemple, si on va identifier un étudiant dans une base de
identifications. If we want to identify a student in an EMIS, you have to identify him in the same way in another database. This is what we propose to Ecuador, to have different systems. They have the big EMIS system, and in parallel, they have 3 other systems, which are systems which they call transactional systems. These are more rapid information systems. So what we advise is to have just one system, one way just of identifying all the students in the system. So I believe this is really essential. And then when you collect information, this is what we do when you collect information. And secondly, regarding the type of information, we have to make sure that we have complementary information which will complete each other, or information which are complementary information. But this depends on the ministry and the needs of the different players and actors. I will now give the floor to Gallo, because I believe he's the expert in this field. Thank you very much, Diego. Gallo, the floor is yours.
Muy amable, estimado Diogo y Martín.
Thank
Todos, ¿no?
you, Diogo, and
Sí.
everyone.
En Ecuador,
So in
más allá
Ecuador,
de las instituciones públicas, tenemos una institución
besides
que se
public
llama
institutions, we have an institution called the National Direction of Public Registries, known as DI and AR. This entity works through the Ministry of Telecommunications, and they issued a resolution that is the scheme of data security or information security. What does it mean? That each public institution that wants to connect with interoperability, that means that they want to use information in another database, as Diogo mentioned. That was one of the recommendations that they gave, and it was great, a great recommendation. So it means that when someone from the Ministry of Education wants to connect themselves with the ministry, for example, council or the social security institution in Ecuador, etc. What we try to do is we try to triangulate. So institution 1, institution 2 talk to each other, and then they talk to the NARP, and then they fill out information such as a confidentiality agreement in order to justify why they need this data and to see if it falls within the scope of each institution. Finally, when it comes to the time that we have, usually interoperability between entities lasts for up to 2 years. For this, we use technology to see if we can share data through a cloud, through a VPN, or if maybe we just go directly through dinar. So then, according to the time frequency that we have, we can share the data, as Diogo mentioned. And in our case, we usually use the ID of each student in our case. Again, we also try to run a search through the name of the student so that we can obtain data of a student and maybe did not declare their ID number. So then we can create or formulate the indicators needed so that we can formulate public policy.
Another question in French, please. For Frost. Are there ways for data collection for children in Palestine who have to move regularly outside the territory as well?
So yes, so we do collect data in the areas of operation that we are working. So we have data on Palestinian refugees that are registered in our schools in Gaza, West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. Of course, if students, for whatever reason, transfer, we have that data. We know that the students transferred because usually they ask for a certificate from the schools, and we can issue that through our EMIS system. But we do not have data on Palestinian refugees that are not within our areas of operation. So this is. I hope I got your question correctly. If not, I'm happy to follow up.
And there is another one related to the protection of the data. So if there is there are some mechanisms to protect the data of individuals. So there is some procedures for that in the context of the data on the emergency situations. Pros.
Sure. So we have data protection policies, and for example, we're working now on trying to link our EMIS system with the ministries of education, the host government, the ministries of education EMIS systems. And of course, we work within protocols for data sharing to ensure that there is protection of data of individuals, and data is not misused for the other purposes than the purposes that it's shared. So we have policies in place that govern this data sharing for the sake of protection of individuals.
Same question for Galo and Benjamin on data protection. Galo ou Benjamin?
Sí.
Ah oui, je
Sí,
¿Procedo? Ya,
adelante,
ok.
Galo.
Ya.
Benjamin.
Con respecto al tema de la
Right.
protección de datos, efectivamente,
Now,
aquí en
with regard
Ecuador,
to
entre
data
algunas leyes,
protection,
tenemos lo que es la ley
yes,
estadística.
in
En su artículo 21
Ecuador,
menciona el tema de
you
la
have
confidencialidad
the
de la información.
statistical
¿Qué significa esto? Que
legislation
cuando
where we speak
recopilamos
about
información
information
debido al cierre
confidentiality.
a
What
la
does that mean?
institución
This is
pública,
Article
¿verdad?
21.
Tenemos que
So,
garantizar que el dato nominal no pueda
when we
ser
collect information for
entregado
statistics,
a
we must
personas
ensure
o
that
o a entidades que
nominative
no la
data
habrán hecho
should
un buen
not be
uso.
given to
Esa es
entities
una.
or
Dos,
people who
tenemos la ley de
can
protección de
use
datos
them
personales.
inappropriately. That's
¿Qué
the first
significa
thing.
aquello? En
Then you've
términos
got the
general,
law
que una vez que
on
nosotros recopilamos
personal data
información del
protection.
Sistema Nacional
Now,
de Educación,
once you've
¿verdad? Tenemos
collected
que tener la
information
autorización de cada
within the
uno de
Ministry
los
of
que se
Education,
recopila la información
you
para nosotros
need
poderla, en administrativamente
authorization
hablando,
from the
utilizarla para hacer otros cruces. Eso
person from
significa
whom
que si yo
information was
recopilo
collected so that
información de
they
los
can be
estudiantes, yo
used for
puedo
data
cruzarme con el
matching.
Ministerio de
For
Salud
instance,
Pública
if
y así poder
I
obtener
collect information
información
on
de tu
students,
estudiante,
I
tiene o no
can
alguna condición de
match this
discapacidad.
information with the Ministry of
También puedo
Health
utilizar la
and
información de
see
ese
if
mismo
a
niño, ¿verdad?
student
Cruzarle con el registro
is
social para
disabled,
confirmar si es que
and I
pertenece o
can
no
use
a
this
un hogar
information
vulnerable por alguna razón
with
bajo
the
ese título.
social registry
Entonces ahí
to
tenemos
see
la ley
if
estadística,
this
artículo 21, confidencialidad de la
students is living in a
información, y la ley
dangerous
de
area. So
protección
we've
de
got
datos personales,
Article
una
21
ley que
on
determina que tiene
statistical
en
law
resumen
and a
el
law
Ministerio de
on personal
Telecomunicaciones, y
data
esto
protection
literal nos
that
gobierna a todo
basically
lo que
comes from the
pertenece al sector
telecom
público
ministry.
dentro de lo
And
que es el
this is
Ecuador
what
como tal.
governs all public
Muchas gracias.
entities.
Benjamin,
Thank you.
Oui.
Benjamin, would you like to contribute? Would you have
donner
anything to say
individuelles.
on data protection, on personal
Bon,
data
il faut
protection,
dire que
please?
dans nos pays,
Right,
effectivement,
in
existe
our country,
des institutions qui
there
protègent les données
are
de caractère
institutions
personnel.
that
On appelle ça
protect
comme
personal
organisme.
data.
Oui. Oui, oui, il y a une institution qui s'occupe de ça. Parce que
There
toute
is
donnée
an
que,
institution in
toute
charge
donnée
of
que vous
that.
faites sortir et que vous n'avez pas
Any
l'aval et que les textes
data
ne l'autorisent pas, bien sûr, vous êtes
is
pourchassé. Mais
obtained
nous, dans le système
is
éducatif, les
protected.
données
In
que
our
nous collectons
education
sont
system,
autorisées par des requêtes. Il faut que
the
le
data,
gouvernement, à travers
the,
le
the
ministre en charge de
government through
l'éducation ou le
the
secrétaire général du
Ministry of
ministère nous autorise,
Education
nous, au STESU,
should
chaque jour, je vous dis bien chaque
authorize
jour,
us to
ce sont
collect
des
data.
chercheurs qui pullulent sur le terrain
Every
technique. Mais on donne les données
we
par palier
provide
d'importance. Il y a des types de données, si on donne le
data.
PNR, l'Agence nationale du renseignement de Burkina nous
We
arrête.
have the
Donc, il faut que le gouvernement
National
autorise par des requêtes.
Information Agency
Si
and the
l'UNICEF
government
veut des
should
fermetures aujourd'hui, la base de
basically
données
authorize
sont
data
fermetures depuis, il faut que
collection.
l'UNICEF écrive au ministre en charge de l'éducation
UNICEF,
qui
for
nous donne
instance, must
injonction à
write
nous. On est dans la base
must
en lien avec le gouvernement. Si
write
on
to
active
the
les
Ministry
bases,
of Education
quand on
and
dit
seek
5000 écoles
permission.
fermées, on va perforer et vous faire ressortir les 5000 écoles fermées où ça se trouve. Tout est là. Mais on ne peut pas
You
donner
can
c'est des
actually
données
see
protégées, les données globalement.
what
Mais les
schools are
données
closed,
liées
but
au,
this
à l'élève,
information
au statut
cannot
d'un élève,
be
d'une fille
provided
qui est élève de
freely.
classe interne ou élève
Any
garçon, élève de classe interne, même son image est protégée. Hein. On a ce qu'on appelle la
data
fiche
on
de document
internally displaced or externally
qui est
displaced
une
students
commission
is very
qui s'occupe
confidential.
de ça. C'est une
There,
institution
even
d'État
his
juste pour la
photo is
protection des données à
confidential,
caractère personnel.
and this
Je ne sais
information
pas
is
si j'ai
not very
répondu un peu
easily
à ça.
shared. I don't know if I've actually answered your question. Yes,
J'ai une autre rapide pour
I
vous.
have another very quick
Monsieur
question for you,
Benjamin,
Mr. Benjamin.
vous demande de manière succincte, pouvez-vous nous relater
Very
dans quel sens l'éducation en
concisely, can you
situation d'urgence est
tell us
importante dans les établissements d'enseignement supérieur pour le Burkina
what
Faso?
are the
Oui, ça, vous le faites venir dans une
education
boîte de cristal et vous touchez tout droit à la réalité. Ça veut dire
emergency
jusqu'à
situations
l'heure où nous sommes, le dispositif pour les
approaches
données
for
en
higher
lien
education
avec
establishments?
les petits enfants,
Now,
je veux dire, du préscolaire jusqu'au à ceux
we
qui sont
have
dans les grands établissements. Mais
strategies from
l'entité universitaire
preschool
n'est pas touchée.
to high school. Now, you see, universities, in fact, are not concerned. And you have the grandes écoles that are actually spared. I don't know if you understand. So there is the ministry in charge of higher education. They can see what we're doing, and but the university is not actually concerned. They are not attacked by terrorists, so there is nothing in terms of education in emergency situations for universities, because they're not the targets of terrorist attacks. Our MS needs data, and it's really important for stakeholders to to properly use the data from the MS. This is what I can say. So the universities have not been have been spared. Thank you. Thank you so much. There is one question on the Chadian context. I think you can answer that. It's a recommendation. Chad is a country that hosts refugees and is actually facing problems in terms of data collection and use dans la situation d'urgence. Until now, their integration in MS is not effective. I would like to know if there is a specific framework to facilitate the integration of EiE data in MS. That is to say, education in emergency situations. So is there a specific framework or any ideas to facilitate the integration of education in emergency situations in the MS system? Right. So we recommend our tools.
On va donner, et d'ailleurs, il y a, parmi les trois outils, il y a l'outil de
amongst the
diagnostic
three
qui est
tools,
celle
you've
qu'on a
got the
utilisé
diagnosis
avec
tool
Hamper,
that
par
we
exemple,
used,
mais il y a aussi l'outil qui va
and
expliquer, donc le troisième que j'ai présenté, qui
the
va
third
expliquer un peu plus en détail quelles sont les différentes
explains
stratégies,
what
qu'est-ce qui a
are the
été fait dans
different
plusieurs pays. Donc, il y a
strategies,
des
what was
exemples
done in
concrets,
various countries. There are
effectivement, pour
tangible
l'info.
examples on integration
Donc,
in each
il y a
countries.
des revues de
Now,
questionnaires qui ont été
there
réalisées, il y a des
are
enquêtes, des études.
questionnaires, studies,
Je
surveys
crois
that have been
que
carried
l'idéal,
out.
c'est
And I
un peu dur
think
de donner des conseils juste en
it's
général
really
sans connaître le
actually
contexte du
hard
pays.
to
Donc, l'idéal, c'est
provide
vraiment de se
some
pencher
advice
sur la
without
question
actually knowing the
à travers les
context.
outils qu'on a produits
So
et essayer
through we
comprendre
should
genre,
try
quels sont
and
les
use
enjeux principaux dans le
our
Tchad, quels sont les
tools
manques de
to
données, donc quels
and
sont les besoins.
understand
Et
what are
ensuite,
the needs and what
proposer
are the
des
main
recommandations
challenges,
ciblées en
and
fonction de ce qu'on
then
retrouve.
have targeted recommendations depending
Parfait.
on what we find.
Merci.
Thank you so much. Now there's a question.
For those, if the data that you are collecting is including a gender perspective.
Yes, definitely. Like, so all the data that we collect are disaggregated by gender and as well as disability.
Okay, I think that we cover most of the questions, and thank you very much for all of you that raised questions. Thank you very much for the response from the panelists. We are getting to the end of this strategic seminar. I think that there are very important issues that we discussed. For example, the need for a good understanding of the data itself, a good sharing of the ideas, the meaning of the data itself. The idea that the education in emergencies data is not only a responsibility of one part of the ministers. There is a lot of coordination that is needed, articulation between the different actors, processes that need to be very well developed. I think that's another very interesting question, interesting and important idea that you raised in the seminar. And finally, also, always as challenges, there is the issue of improving the data itself, no? That was mentioned in the different presentations. And that's always came together with the need of reinforced capacities, something that we are very interested to continue to promote in the institute. So thank you very much for your participation. I want to say something at the end. We're going to be having a second strategic debate on July the 11th, same time, at 2:30 Paris time. And it's going to be about the use of data and research in the construction of sectoral analysis or sectoral plans. So we hope that you are going to be also participating in that seminar. Thank you very much again to the panelists. Very interesting presentation, and thank you also to all the participants in this first strategic debate. Thank you, and see you on July 11th.
OK, merci bien à vous aussi de nous avoir associés. Espérons que d'autres sessions vont suivre.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much for inviting us, and we hope there'll be other sessions as well.